Okay, picture this. It's 1656, Stockholm Harbor. A single coin falls off a ship, sinks straight to the bottom, and it's gone forever. Now, fast forward 3.5 centuries, and the savings of millions of people, they vanish in pretty much the same way. The connection between that one long-lost coin and the balance of your bank account today, well, that's the wild story we're about to unpack.
So just how heavy was that coin? Get this, 19 kilograms. That's about 42 pounds. For a single coin. I mean, can you imagine trying to carry a few of those around just to buy groceries? It was an absolutely absurd system. A real workout. So how on earth does this giant lump of metal have anything to do with the digital numbers you see on your screen? It's because the solution to this very heavy problem ended up creating the entire financial world we live in now, with all its power, all its flaws, and, you guessed it, all its hidden costs.
So our story really starts with this one guy, Johan Palmstruck. He was this brilliant, super persuasive entrepreneur, and he talked the king of Sweden into letting him run a bank. His number one job? Solve this crazy heavy coin problem. And, well, his solution was about to change everything.
Palmstruck's idea was just genius in its simplicity. He just printed paper notes, basically IOUs, that stood for the actual copper he had locked away in his vault. It was easy, it was light, it was revolutionary. Suddenly, for the first time in Europe, money wasn't a thing anymore. It was an idea. It was a promise. And you know what? It worked. The Swedish economy absolutely boomed. And right here, this is where we find the fatal flaw. Palmstruck, well, he got a little carried away. He started printing way more promises than he had copper to back them up. I mean, way more. Think about it. If you had the superpower to create money out of thin air, would you ever stop? A massive credit boom followed, right up until people started showing up asking for their actual copper back. And the copper just wasn't there. The paper became worthless, and that, my friends, is how inflation is born. Palmstruck's bank got seized by the state, and just like that, it became the world's very first central bank. He died a forgotten man, but the machine he built, oh, it was just too tempting to resist. It has repeated itself over and over and over again for the last 350 years. This kicked off a 5-step cycle of crisis that you absolutely have to understand. So pay attention here, because we're going to see this exact pattern play out time and time again. First, a new idea is born. Second, everyone gets excited and overuse it. Third, the whole thing crashes. Fourth, a central bank steps in to save the day. And fifth, that very fix just plants the seeds for the next crisis. It's a loop. Okay, let's fast forward a couple of centuries. So in the 1920s, the world got a taste of both extremes. First up, Germany. The central bank there just printed money into oblivion. The head of the bank was actually proud of it, announcing they were printing 20 trillion marks a day. So in response, the world's bankers chained themselves to this super rigid gold standard. The idea was to force some discipline, right? But it ended up being a straitjacket. So when the Wall Street crash hit, they couldn't do a thing. They were stuck. And instead of helping, they made the crisis infinitely worse. And the real-world cost, it was catastrophic. We're not just talking about numbers on a page here. The economic devastation in Germany, which was fueled by the Great Depression, directly led to the Nazi Party's terrifying rise to power. Bad money policy doesn't just crash markets, you see. It can break entire societies. All right, let's jump to 2008 and see how this pattern evolves. When Lehman Brothers collapsed and kicked off a global meltdown, the central bankers of that era were literally haunted by the ghosts of the 1930s. Ben Bernanke, who was the Fed chairman, was a top scholar on the Great Depression. He and his colleagues, they decided they were going to do the exact opposite of what their predecessors did back then. I mean, just look at this contrast. In the 30s, they tightened their belts. In 2008, they threw the floodgates wide open. On October 8, 2008, for the first time in history, 6 of the world's biggest central banks all cut interest rates at the same time. It was this big, coordinated move. They didn't just save a few things, they tried to save everything. And this whole new philosophy was basically cemented by these 3 little words: whatever it takes. In 2012, Italy and Spain were on the very brink of default. The head of the European Central Bank, Mario Draghi, made this famous promise. Honestly, it was a bluff, but it worked. He flooded the system with money and swore he'd do anything to save the euro. The crisis stopped, but a totally new era began. So, great, they saved the world, right? Well, yes and no. There was a price to pay for all this.
And it's a price that's been quietly taken out of your wallet ever since. What was supposed to be this short-term emergency fix, it became the new normal. By 2017, this was the combined size of the balance sheets of just 3 central banks: the US Fed, the ECB, and the Bank of Japan. $14 trillion. All of it assets bought with money that was basically created out of thin air. The scale of it is just, it's almost impossible to wrap your head around.
And here's exactly how that giant number hits you personally. First, your savings, your pension, they barely grow. They're actually losing value because they're earning less than inflation. Second, yeah, your mortgage might be cheaper, but that same cheap credit has launched house prices into the stratosphere. Third, the stock market went on a tear, not always because of real healthy growth, but because all that cheap money had to go somewhere. And fourth, and this one is huge, the gap between the rich and everybody else widened like crazy. If you owned assets, you got richer. If you lived on a salary, you got left behind.
So this brings us to the most unsettling part of this entire story. There is no way out. There's no exit plan. The central banks are completely trapped in the system they built. They're just like Johann Palmstruck after he printed one too many notes. Except this time, the vault is the entire global economy. This quote from the head of Mexico's central bank right before the 2008 crash, it says everything. For the very first time, the crisis was actually born in the developed world, and all these emerging countries were just forced to follow America's lead. And this has pushed countries like China to start building their own separate system, one that doesn't rely on the US dollar. The world's single financial system, it's starting to crack. And that gets us to the heart of the trap. They can't stop. They just can't. If they try to sell off those trillions in assets, the markets will completely crash. If they raise interest rates too high, governments won't be able to pay their debts. The so-called emergency measures are now just permanent life support. So if the system can't stop itself, what can? Is there even a plan B? The answer is yes, but it's probably not what you're thinking. Think of the central banking system like Newton's law. It's this massive body in motion. It's been heading in the same direction for 15 years. It will not and it cannot stop on its own. It needs something else. It needs an external force. So, what is that force? That force isn't some other central bank or a new crypto or some fancy new technology. It's us. It's your awareness. It's you, understanding that the low interest rate on your mortgage isn't some gift from the heavens. It's a side effect of a massive monetary experiment. It's knowing that the numbers you see every day are the direct result of decisions made in rooms you will never, ever enter. That knowledge, that is the only real plan B there is. Which brings us right back to where we started. Every single time a central banker thought they could just print their way out of a problem, all they did was create the next, bigger problem. So the real question is for you, now that you know the story, what role are you going to play? Are you going to be the ship's captain who understands the currents and actually navigates the water? Or are you just going to be the heavy coin, sinking to the bottom, waiting for a rescue that's never going to come?